This episode is sponsored by the Body Image Upgrade, a 30-day course helping you rebuild your relationship with your body. Tools, resources, and daily exercises to upgrade your body image. Learn more at bodyimageupgrade.com and enter the code podcast for 50% off. Welcome to Breaking Body Biases, a podcast about creating health and happiness without worrying about your weight. I'm Christine D. Philippus, certified fitness professional, studio owner, and creator of FitProEd, an online education platform for group fitness instructors. Join me every week as I interview fellow fitness pros, dietitians, wellness practitioners, and a wealth of others who are sharing their journey and helping to destroy diet culture. Welcome to episode 17 of the Breaking Body Biases podcast. This is Christine here, your host, and I'm so grateful to have you here. It is a holiday week for us in the United States, and it's the unofficial start of summer. And while we phase into this next season, a lot of people start thinking about summer bodies. And we are going to be, if you haven't already been, bombarded with advertisements about getting your summer body. Let me just tell you, you have your summer body. It is beautiful. It is serving you. Move your body today. You're going to learn in today's episode how you can have some body respect and body neutrality, because I know loving yourself every day is not easy. So let me tell you a little bit about our guest today, Clinical Psychologist Dr Meghan Gallagher from Integrated Wellness in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. She's on the show today, and in her practice, she works with adolescents, adults, couples, and families who are experiencing a range of difficulties related to mental health concerns, interpersonal and relationship problems, adjusting to major life transitions. And Dr. Gallagher has specific interest and extensive experience in the assessment and treatment of eating disorders and body image concerns, anxiety disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, mood disorders, and adolescent mental health. She's very passionate, and she strives to encourage intuitive eating, working from a health at every size approach, and breaking down diet culture and the quote-unquote wellness obsession. In addition to her clinical practice, Dr. Gallagher provides clinical supervision and consultation to regulated health providers. She's also very active in providing public education and training and education to healthcare providers in those areas of eating disorder, body image, and mental health. And we'll be talking about those topics today: eating disorders, emotional eating, body image, working within body respect and body neutrality. So let's listen to the advice that Dr. Gallagher shares with us today. So welcome, Meagan, to the podcast. I'm so glad to have you here today.
Hi, Christine. Thanks for having me.
And we do share a last name with Gallagher. That's my maiden name and your married name, right?
Yes, I inherited mine.
I feel like we have some kind of sisterhood now with that same last name. And we also have some similarities, obviously, in the work that we're doing. You work as a clinical psychologist. I absolutely love the tagline at your practice. It's never too late to live your best life. So why don't you share with our listeners the work that you do and how you got into doing this particular work as a clinical psychologist?
Sure. So in my practice based in Ottawa, Ontario, I work with individual clients, adult clients, adolescents, couples, and families. And the focus of my work is usually on anxiety disorders and a lot of body image and eating disorders as well, with a big focus on health at every size and intuitive eating. And really, I came to this probably as a generally anxious person, my entire life, but then also growing up as an athlete as a kid in some pretty body focused activities like dance and synchronized swimming and speed swimming. And for me, I kind of lucked out in the fact that when I encountered some eating issues as a younger kid, I kind of was the stereotypical kid, right? The little white girl who had lost a whole bunch of weight and had the benefit of being at an age where my mom, the other piece of benefit that I had was I have a mother who is an exceptional mom and also an exceptional healthcare provider. So when your kids start struggling and your Greek mother, who is a nurse, takes control of that, it really worked in my benefit. So that's really a thing that I, at the time maybe struggled with, but now as an adult, and especially as an adult doing the work that I do, look back with so much appreciation and kind of be like, yeah, you really lucked out that you were sort of at the right place at the right time. And things got turned around pretty quickly. So in terms of like my evolution in terms of schooling, I, started university and didn't really know what I wanted to do, but took some psych classes and then really got linked into it. And the person who taught my abnormal psychology class was also an eating disorders researcher. So I started working with him for my honors thesis. I did my master's with him. And then I was able to come to the University of Ottawa for my PhD and worked with Dr. Tasca and the team at the Regional Center for Eating Disorders for my training in terms of clinical training and research for my PhD. And it's been sort of a niche that has stuck ever since.
And what are some of the eating disorders? We'll talk about that during this interview today. What are some of the eating disorders that are out there that our listeners can be aware of that you work with?
Primarily that I work with, especially because I don't work with young children. There are some eating and feeding disorders that show up typically kind of in younger kids. And so I will leave that to the child psychology experts to discuss. I see a lot of folks in my practice with anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, binge eating disorder, and then a whole host of sort of what we would term as otherwise specified or even just disordered eating generally. And so within our sort of our diagnostic language of otherwise specified eating disorders. Sometimes these are things like orthorexia that people may hear about. And the reality is sometimes people are given a diagnosis of sort of an otherwise specified disorder. This isn't unique to eating disorders. It's true in mental health across the board, where they may like feeling, is that not a serious thing? And across the board, that's absolutely not true. And especially when it comes to eating disorders, what we know from clinical research is folks in an otherwise specified category have very, very similar degrees of illness, distress, and impairment to someone with a different diagnosed eating disorder. The reality is our diagnostic systems are kind of categories to help guide treatment, but people don't fit into boxes. So there's a lot of sometimes, just individual differences or idiosyncrasies where we say that doesn't fit this, but we see you and it's a real problem. It's a real problem in terms of psychological functioning and in the sense of eating disorders, physical health functioning as well.
Yeah, I think growing up, I was under the impression that there's anorexic. You can be anorexic. And that's, I grew up, I'm going to date myself now, but I remember when Karen Carpenter died, and that was what my visual of what someone with suffering with anorexia was: someone that was thin, someone that's white. And then you had bulimia, and those were the kind of the two eating disorders that I grew up learning about, and that was pretty much it. So there really is so much more, that there is more than just those two eating disorders. And like you'd mentioned, disordered eating, and it affects so much of our lives. We don't have to be like Karen Carpenter and die from an eating disorder, but there's so much. So when you work with clients, you're trying to get them to a place of improving their quality of life and their mental health and their health, their overall physical health too. So what are some of the things that you do when you work with clients to help them to create healthier spaces for them?
First of all, you're not dating yourself too much by saying these are the ones you grew up with, because even things like binge eating disorder has only really pulled out as its own fully kind of flushed out separate disorder in DSM-5, which is our newest diagnostic clarification. So as an 80s baby, I will also say we're not dating ourselves that much. When it comes to working with clients, it's the most important part, I think, is to really be able to kind of meet that client where they are at. Because if we think, I have a new client that I'm going to be meeting with, or I have a new referral for an individual with an eating disorder, and we go in with a lens of, okay, I know what I'm doing, so I know this client and I know what they're going to need, it becomes very pejorative. And we may really miss a lot of important things. People do what they do for very good reason. no one is living with an eating disorder thinking like this was a lifestyle choice or this is really the way I want to be functioning. The reality is that eating disorder symptoms, whether we're talking the more restrictive symptoms, more binge symptoms, or different compensatory methods, like certainly we often think of self-induced vomiting or purging, but also different medication uses, over exercising, and all of that kind of stuff in terms of compensation strategies. These things are serving a function in people's lives, whether that is to say, I'm feeling a whole whack of overwhelming stuff that I can't make sense of. And some of my symptoms actually help tamper that down and let me function with that kind of running in the background. I'm not quite so consumed all the time. Or my emotions just get so big so fast that some of these symptoms actually, in their own kind of like air quotes, help in the moment. And there was a post I saw not too long ago that really made this nice analogy of like an eating disorder, kind of like a heavy warm blanket. If we are freezing and if we are shivering, we grab that blanket and we go, oh, it did what I needed. But then if it's sort of fused to us a bit more, and now, we're out in that like that hot summer weather and we're suffering and we can't breathe, it stops working. And that is very much how these things become entrenched for people. I worked with someone a long time ago who made the lovely analogy of anorexia as her poison gift. It would show up, had this bow on it, made this promise, and then afterwards, like, it's poisoning me. Like, this is killing me. So I think it's really important to be thinking, how are we doing a very individualized assessment, given what we know as clinicians, as medical professionals? How are we also incorporating our clients' expertise and knowledge about their own experience and their own history to do a really thoughtful kind of assessment of where they are at, what they need? And this may be our, like as a psychologist, our own psychological interventions, but also given their level of distress, given other complicating factors, what other health professionals would we make recommendations to kind of build that team? And eating disorders specifically they're quite a complex psychological and physical health concern. So we are often working with people as physicians, registered dietitians, sometimes occupational therapists, or recovery coaches as kind of part of a greater support net for people.
So you mentioned something about emotional eating. It triggered something in me, and I know that there's been a lot of conversation about emotional eating. I love that analogy of the blanket, that it can serve a purpose, that it can make you feel good and it can bring you comfort, but then it can be too much if it's your only coping mechanism, right? So I guess my question to you is about emotional eating. When is it too much where we're using food to cope? And I know that this year, more than any other year in our lives, we've, turned to food as a way to cope. When does that become unhealthy? When you work with clients, how do you help clients to kind of navigate that area?
And you really hit the nail on the head there in terms of like when it is our only strategy, right? When it is our only kind of tool in our toolbox. That is one of the times when we might think, yeah, this isn't working quite so well, right? Because if we really try to take that even just kind of concrete analogy of our toolkit, if I say, I have a box and it's all hammers, cool, that works sometimes. And other times they're going to just kind of do some damage and make a mess. So when we think of emotional eating, and this is something that, I hear so frequently from clients, whether they're people coming in seeking eating disorder or disordered eating services specifically, or just people more broadly who have this shame around, I'm an emotional eater.
Yeah.
And okay, well, then they're all in good company because we all are, right? Especially as young mammals, we have very limited ways of kind of getting our needs met and being soothed. We are fed or we're held and rocked. And biologically, this does soothing stuff for us. So we're built for this and we learn to do it. And there are times when we eat for emotional reasons, like celebrating a birthday, celebrating a promotion. Let's go out for snacks. Let's get that cake. There's an emotional tone to that. We don't usually judge ourselves for that. We may also think, I'm feeling kind of low. And at our house, my husband will kind of make fun of me for this. He'll be like, oh, it's really rainy. We should get pizza. He's like, yeah, but Other times you're like, oh, the weather's so nice, we should go get pizza.
Yeah.
And it's fine if we're saying, hey, I've had a rough day, and maybe it is that moment of the weather's really crummy. I don't want to go for a walk. Or, especially in our current circumstances, maybe some other things that would have been a nice distraction for me or would have kind of like, switched up my mood, unfortunately aren't available. Maybe some other even creative outlets that I have, I just can't do anymore. So I find myself like looking up recipes I like in baking and cooking. I know this has certainly been a big thing for me, especially over the winter months. We can see there are all sorts of really great reasons and functional reasons that we eat around emotion, and it's all fine. It's when we start kind of getting into a space of it either being the only thing we know how to do, or when we're getting to a more kind of really overwhelming or consuming space, like something like if someone has binge episodes during an eating disorder, or is having binge episodes as part of kind of self-harm behavior, where we're saying this is the payoff here for you, it is really outweighed by a lot of the distress and a lot of the really hard feelings you're having around this. So we want to
Wow.
make sure that things aren't being damaging to people, and that's both mentally, emotionally, and physiologically. If every time I eat, born from kind of a strong emotion, I have a whole other day of feeling really depressed, really beating myself up, and just and feeling like a worthless person, that wasn't such a helpful, emotionally based use of food.
Hmm. And then when does it cross the line? I know there's been people that talk about food addiction, because food's one of the things that, if you have an addiction to things like alcohol, you can remove it completely from your life and you have no need for it, right? If you have an alcohol addiction or drug addiction. But for food, we all need it to survive. So I know that some people say that they're emotional eaters or they have a food addiction. And do you work in those spaces? Is that a real thing, or is that something that's just made up? Or
I think that the sense of like that pull is so strong, that food is the thing I can use, will feel in a psychological sense like an addiction to people. And if we look at kind of, more broad, and certainly I'm not an addictions expert by any means, so some of your listeners may have more info about this, but if we think of a very kind of general view of addiction, it's saying, okay, if that substance or that thing is removed, that there are adverse consequences to how we're feeling, and we spend a lot of time thinking, and going out of our way to kind of get say substance. Well, when we apply that to food for us just generally as people, it's kind of true that we're all in a way like addicted to food. The same way we're addicted to water, we're addicted to air. We need this, and when it is removed, we incur pretty adverse physiological and psychological responses. I think where it comes to that addictions piece is where we're saying like, is this the only way that I feel capable of managing my stress, my distress, or navigating difficult situations? And that's where we're saying, okay, you've tried this out, you've done this. And what's quite different from maybe a typical addictions model is we don't have an abstinence approach on the table when it comes to our relationship with food in our bodies. And it's by no means to say that an abstinence approach to substance uses is an easy thing for an individual to do, but it's an option. In this way, we really do need to think, okay, this is something that has like really developed a lot of really strong feelings, anxieties. I feel like there's this hold that it has over me, and I need to be able to kind of take it out of that cage and walk it around a few times a day for the rest of my life. So when we're thinking like, are we working in kind of like emotional eating, and the idea of like that really strong emotional drive that for some may kind of feel like that addiction kind of piece around food, yeah, probably like anyone working with emotion regulation and eating disorders is probably doing that work to some degree. But I think there's also in my practice a lot of actual education about, hey, maybe some of the things that we've been told about that, that diagnostic almost implication of you're an emotional eater or you're like a food addict and these kinds of things. Medically, that doesn't really hold.
right.
And the fact that you were experiencing a ton of distress about it is totally valid and important and deserves recognition and support.
So unlearning some of that diet culture, because that's kind of where that all stems from, that belief system that, like you said, I'm an emotional eater, or I'm addicted to starches, or I'm addicted to sugar, or I'm addicted to snacking, or insert any labeled food that's considered on the naughty list right now. Back in the, we'll date ourselves again, back when fat was bad. Insert fat, the non-fat diet was popular back in the day.
What it comes to too is, like you said, if something's on the naughty list, if something's on my no-go or do not eat list, my brain is always going to orient toward the thing that I am saying I cannot have. And right, if for anyone listening, like if you have little kids and you go, oh no, don't touch that. Touch. Why?
Yeah.
Well, because you said I couldn't. For anyone raising teenagers, no, I don't want you to do that. You're not the boss of me. I'll do what I want, right? We somehow kind of ping pong internally when we've made that rule of I can't eat insert type of food here, or amount or timing of. We are going like, no, I'm always going to think about the thing I'm not supposed to be thinking of. I'm always at some point going to hit that wall and go to our like teenage rebellious space of like, no one's going to tell me what to do. And the other thing, especially for those who are really kind of entrenched in diet culture, which breeds so much anxiety, or those who are diagnosed with an eating disorder, these mentalities are also setting food up as a dangerous thing to be feared. And that's the other biological part that our brain will always do. We want to know where the scary thing is. If this is dangerous to me, if I'm at risk, I really need to monitor it, right? If we're sitting in a room with, a well-behaved adult dog who just kind of chills out and does their thing and wanders over for a snuggle every once in a while, we can lose track of them. It doesn't really matter where they are in the room. But if we are in a room with a dog that's unpredictable, snarly, and rabid, you and I are both going to know exactly where that dog is all the time. So for both kind of attentional reasons of saying like, no, you can't think about that, and really risk perception and self-preservation reasons, we will divert a ton of attention almost to kind of an obsessional place about the thing we're not allowed to have because it's so bad and dangerous.
So true. I'm having like flashbacks to parts of my life when I knew exactly where that dog was. For sure.
Right, because if that dog kind of comes over and is snarling, I mean, diet culture and eating disorders certainly say like, this is going to have catastrophic impact on you and you can't handle it, right? You need my rules. You need my influence. You can't do it.
So how can we set a realistic and healthy approach to our health between food or movement, and setting really good intentions to be healthy without being restricted or obsessive?
Yeah, it's certainly too much of a good thing, right? That we can think, does my nutritional intake, does my body getting what it needs, which may vary a lot from person to person, day to day, activity to activity. Is my body getting enough? We don't want to say that my nutrition is of zero importance to me, because it is part of our health. The same way with movement. If we say no, movement and how I move my body doesn't matter at all. Some people might have less interest. I'm assuming based on your audience, that's probably not the crew we're talking with today. But to think, what are my intentions here? I always want to know, what's your why? If I'm going to go do that activity, if I'm going to choose that meal or that snack, or choose not to have it, what's behind that? What's it about? Because our plates can look exactly the same. Our workout at the gym that day can look exactly the same. And yours might be really grounded and healthy, and mine might not. It's so much of it. And especially when it comes to physical movement, at more sort of extreme times, if we say, someone's health is really deteriorated and they're medically unstable, or, they're running on that injury that's making it worse, we can say we've lapsed into a place that's clearly not working for your body. But otherwise, if we're thinking, well, how do we know? And people often have a difficult time, and they'll often come and say, I don't know. When it comes to my eating disorder, I know what food patterns or what compensation strategies are clearly not healthy, but like, what about working out? And how do I know when I'm reintroducing that, especially, how do I know that it's okay? And it's really taking a look at like, why are you choosing this? And for anyone who does work with folks with eating disorders or disordered eating, be ready to be asked, well, why do you do it? I know over the course of my life, certainly in like my earlier adulthood, part of that when and overdoing it, having a bit of a like a not so healthy relationship with exercise was around stress management. If I can really just exhaust myself, I can finally sleep. Like I don't have another outlet. And it's tricky because it's really socially reinforced, right? There are probably a lot of people I know I heard like, you're so dedicated. Well, I'm not really dedicated. I'm here a lot. And I'm also trying to ward off a nervous breakdown. Dedication isn't the word that I would put to it. It wasn't what felt right for me at the time. But then also thinking, okay, so if we're approaching this from a healthy stance, well, am I having fun? Am I getting creative? Am I learning a new thing? Do I like the people or the environment that I go to? I know for me, certainly, like that idea of sleep quality, that I do it so I can sleep. And now for a good reason, not I'm so anxious I need to have myself nearly comatose to go to bed. That there are a lot of whys. And even when that comes to food choices, why am I choosing this? If it's because it's on my current plan, or because I don't get anxious when I try it, we might want to kind of move that around a bit. We might want to actually engage that rebellious inner teenager part of ourselves who goes like, I'm not listening. You can't tell me what to do. And like get out there and kind of get surly with it and break those rules.
I appreciate what you said about the dedicated part, because I think when I was at my most obsessed, I definitely wasn't enjoying myself. I was chasing that ideal body type that I was working out several hours a day, and my food consumption was not serving that workout. And it definitely wasn't serving my taste buds or my joy. But I would get people saying the same thing two different ways. They would say, "You're so dedicated." And it was like a compliment. But then it also, there were people that would be telling me, "You're over dedicated." Like I mean, borderline obsessed. I was obsessed, to be honest, that the people that were living normal, balanced lives would recognize it and kind of say that in a negative way. So I think it's just a matter of like finding that balance, because, dedication mixed with obsession is not healthy.
And I think it's a good point that when we're really in something, and whether that's I'm like, oh, I'm so in this because it's the only way I know how to manage my stress, or I'm really kind of in this because of like kind of body goals and that kind of thing. If people are worried about someone in their life, be compassionate and be kind, but also be direct, and know that if someone is in an eating disorder or in kind of a very sort of stuck coping strategy, more vague things that you say will be filtered in a specific way that is probably not what you mean. So, if I notice that, well, you're running yourself ragged, they'll say, oh, hey, Christine, like you're really dedicated. In that kind of exercise obsession, we're like, yeah, I am. People are noticing. It's paying off. As opposed to me saying, hey, can I talk to you? I'm kind of concerned. I know you're putting in a little work over here. I'm also maybe noticing that it's hard for you to kind of come and hang out and be present with us as a family or as friends. And like, I'm just concerned. Like, how are you feeling? And open that to have that conversation. The same if people are concerned about, family, friends, clients with eating disorders, to be able to say like, how are you, and how are you doing with your relationship with food and with your body?
Do you think that sometimes people don't ask these questions because we are so taught and kind of consumed with diet culture telling us that it's better to be like, we put this label that it's healthy, that it's healthy to work out every day. It's healthy to eat cleaner. I'm using air quotes because I hate that term, cleaner. So when someone is taking that approach and being obsessive or being dedicated or being overly, it's just extreme in some way, and it could be an eating disorder, could be disordered eating, there's some kind of disorder in some way, that it's so acceptable to do that. And that, so no one's having these, because I don't remember anyone having any kind of conversation with me and worry about my health, because I think everyone assumed my health was probably great because I'm working out, because I'm eating strict. But it gets this gold stamp of, oh, this is superior. And I may not want to do it, but praise to you for stepping up to this kind of elite challenge of eating really clean and working out all the time. Do you ever experience that challenge? Because there are people that, like I did, needed someone like you just mentioned to kind of talk to me and say, maybe this isn't serving you. So do you get a lot of people that have people in their lives that are helping them? I mean, this is a very long question. It sparked my thoughts about diet culture and how strong that diet culture is and the influence of it.
It does depend. It really can kind of go like a lot of ways. And generally, when I'm working with someone who says, so and so in my life was really concerned, their concern was the impetus for me maybe taking a look at this. It unfortunately is either when someone is really kind of fitting sort of that sort of unfortunate and incorrect stereotype of what a person with an eating disorder or disordered eating would look like. Or sometimes if people have someone in their life who has kind of done the work themselves, they go, I kind of remember being where you were, and that was rough for me. How are you? But you make the point of like that this is so normalized, right? And even when we think of, well, yeah, I'm not feeling great about my body, but that's normal, right? And I think especially as women, we're always supposed to be like, what, losing X amount of pounds, right? Oh, my goal is. Imagine if we just went like, my energy's good and my health's great and me and my body are having a good time together. That's an option too. It's just not what's really been reinforced to us and not what we've been socialized to do. So the idea of a certain, like what we refer to sort of normative body dissatisfaction doesn't mean that's great for people and that's fine. It's just like, that's on average where most people hang out in terms of their view of their body. Same thing with diet culture, right? That idea that eating disorders are one thing, eating disorders are not a diet. But the vast majority of people who are actually dieting and are chronic dieters aren't following a specific plan. But they do have kind of these rules, and they have these go and kind of no-go foods or ways of eating, amounts of eating that they try to be strict with, and when they're not, they really feel like, oh, I fell off the wagon, or I feel a lot of distress, or I feel like I'm failing. So that's always my challenge to people, is to think, okay, you're not following a specific plan, but how free are you truly in terms of your eating and your movement choices? If we took intentional weight loss, weight control, a certain aesthetic completely off the table, is this still a way you would be choosing to nourish and move your body? And the most common response is, I don't know how to answer that.
Yeah, that's a challenging question because I think we've been so taught to have those kind of aesthetic goals.
Mm-hmm. Or that it's supposed to be like punishing or arduous. If I'm good at nutrition, it's supposed to somehow feel like deprivation. Or if I'm serious about working out or my physical, like increasing my cardiovascular fitness, that could be a very health promoting goal for a person. It doesn't mean you need to feel like barfing your guts out at the end of a workout.
Yeah, when you have activities that are promoting go hard or go home, like those kind of taglines are very dangerous in the fitness industry.
I was listening to one of your recent episodes where you guys were talking about like that idea of looking at people in mirrors and comparing to others around them. And as I'm like listening to this, getting ready for work one morning, I'm thinking it's not even about comparing to other people, right? In terms of fitness perspective, the middle ground is often, don't compare. It's not about you. It's you versus you. Why do I have to be against anyone? What if I just did the thing because I liked the thing?
Yeah. We do that a lot as we age. How often do we look back at the pictures of ourselves when we're younger and like, I need my 20-year-old body back? We look back and kind of want something back from ourselves and kind of competing with our own bodies, but we're aging. We're having children, like so many components that'll change our body.
Sometimes we're going, hey, I'm comfortable in my own skin and I'm happy. So some of those things that created that aesthetic, I wouldn't go back and trade that for anything.
Yeah.
The other part is, and probably a lot of people have had this experience of thinking like, oh, what I thought of my body as a teenager and when I was in my early 20s, that body image I held, looking back at a photo of that now, I'm going, oh, that's not what I was seeing then.
No.
That idea of our body image is not the size and shape of our body. It is our perception and feeling about. So that idea that like your body image is not really in your weight or shape. Your body image is in your mind and how you're seeing yourself and how you're appreciating yourself.
I've done that many times where I look at myself decade ago, 20 years ago, and then say, what was I thinking? I should have appreciated what I had. I thought I was fat then, or I thought this, or I didn't like my thighs, or insert whatever.
And a lot of times when we're doing body image work with people, we'll look at a photo of, and sometimes it's a bit tricky because a lot of people, when they're really in their eating disorder, the other myth of like, oh, someone would want to be showing off their body is really not the case. So, hey, do you have any photos of yourself at the time? Oh, hell no. The idea that someone would take my picture, absolutely not. Or if it is, there's like a lot of layers in covering up. But when people do have those moments to be able to sort of say, hey, can I look back to myself with a lot of compassion, not back with judgment, not, oh, I should have changed this sooner. Why couldn't I just then? But the idea of like, wow, looking at this now, I really see someone who maybe looks unwell or scared or stressed or sad. And there's that idea to kind of approach our past selves with compassion. If we've done the work and we're doing differently and we're doing better is really important. And even for those who are sort of like, diet culture kind of recovering folks, as I think most of us are, that idea of kind of body grief or having some sense of grief or lost time of how much did I actually spend, whether that's my time, my money, my emotions, kind of doing what diet culture told me to do. We can think, oh, I was so stupid. I should have known better. Or we can think like, oh, that sucks. And that's hard. And it's hard to kind of think, I'm seeing that now with clearer eyes. And maybe our only stance towards ourselves is one of compassion, one of wanting to kind of like be protective.
Yeah. So you talked about body image because that's the work that you do with your clients. So why don't we finish off with talking about body respect and body neutrality?
Yes. Body positivity is fantastic. And if we all woke up every morning and went like, damn, you look good, and I feel so great about this, that would be really lovely. That's not going to be what happens for most people, whether we're in diet culture, in an eating disorder, or like fully diet culture recovery. We have off days. And when people are really in it, the idea of like, think positively about your body, right? Oh, well, if you want me to just kind of say these positive affirmations, sure, I can say that. And we go, okay, does that shift things for you? How much do you buy it? If someone goes, I don't, it's not going to work. The idea of thinking, can I approach my body from a neutral stance, thinking, what does it do for me? What does it allow me to do? In our current context of COVID, to be able to think, wow, something that my body is really helping me to do is stay healthy and safe. And whether that's from someone who's gotten ill and recovered or who's not been sick and kind of buffered things, our bodies do some pretty amazing things, right? They stop us from getting sick. They help us to heal. For some people, they grow children. They help us jump, run, play, do all sorts of things. To really be able to say, how is it functioning? What does it do? And if we're being honest, there are so many more cool things that our bodies do instead of what they look like. That's pretty reductive. It's kind of like saying, what does your computer do? It's shiny. Okay.
True.
And
So
probably some
true.
other stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
But when it comes to that, if I can say I'm approaching my body from that space of respect, I can notice what it does, what it's able to do, and what it does for me, what it allows me to do. I can also then start approaching it from a space of respect. I don't need to feel glowingly lovely and positive about my body every day, but I can approach it from a space of respect. And it's sort of forever something that's banging around my head and that I'm having these conversations about is we do not get to choose our thoughts and our emotions. So when I hear somebody beat themselves up, I had a negative like body image thought, or I was in a bad body image headspace. Okay, we don't get to choose those things. That's just events that our brains are doing. We do, however, have actual agency and responsibility around choosing our actions and our responses to these things. So much like we might think, oh, if I'm furious with my partner or my partner hurt my feelings, okay, I'm having a thought and I'm having a feeling. And now I'm at a point where I can say, how do I want to approach this person in my life? Do I want to go on the attack? Do I want to ignore them and freeze them out? Do I want to say, hey, like that didn't feel very good, and like what's going on between us? And what's really important is that we actually approach our bodies from that sort of relational framework, right? We have a relationship with ourselves. We have a relationship with our physical body. If we've really been entrenched in diet culture and eating disorder for a long time, it makes sense that we go, oh, I don't know that I can trust it. And why would it trust me? We can build that back. And it is a matter of saying, I am going to show up and treat myself with general respect. I'm going to treat myself the way I would actually treat a person in my life, because we should be, and this may sound egotistical, but like the actual most important person in our lives. We're kind of that hub of that wheel in our life. And if we're not willing to prioritize ourselves, we're in for a rough go.
Yeah. I love talking to you, Meagan. Dr. Gallagher here. I know that people will want to follow you on social media. Your Instagram has such great like tips and advice and just uplifting information. So definitely follow Dr. Gallagher on our Instagram. I'll put all of her contact information in our show notes. And I have a few quick questions just to get to know you a little bit better. I love asking our guests their favorite way to move their body.
My favorite ways when it comes to summertime things, because here in Canada we have some, seasonally different approaches. Currently, walking and audiobooks have been my favorite. And sometimes that means I'm walking around and kind of laughing. Sometimes I'm going like, oh, I'm glad I have sunglasses on because that hit a nerve. I'm walking and crying. Also, when it comes to, more sort of maybe standard exercise things, I like weight training. When it comes to winter activities, snowboarding. And I think the things that I tend to have sort of a mind-body connection component. And all those things, those three things for me kind of go, yeah, you need to actually be present with what you're doing.
And your favorite way to practice self-care?
Saying no.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
I am, I think by nature, like a could person, and not could in a like what is possible, but in a like, it's just my brain is warped should into a could. And right. So it's been an exercise in self-growth, an ongoing way to take care of myself, to kind of think, if my initial response is no, just because I can doesn't mean it is good for me. And if I'm deciding to add something to my life, that's purposeful and that's either matches up to something that I'm interested in or that's values based for me.
I like that. Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Nope.
I think this year has taught us how to step back a little bit more, because we haven't been able to do all the things. It was a forced pause. And hopefully people will take that as an opportunity in the coming years to pause before committing to anything.
Definitely. And I think it was like sort of a few months in, remember kind of having this moment of like, wow, I'm actually doing a pretty big like self audit around what's working and what's not, and truly in my current context, what's working and what's not. Not, well, what worked before, so I should be trying to make this work. Or even things that I thought, that was a way that I spent a bunch of my time and it was something that I like doing. Do I want to find kind of a dupe or an alternative for that? Or is it just not quite so important to me right now?
And then a favorite music or song or genre?
All over the map. I knew you were going to ask me this. Like I told you before we started recording, it was a thing like, oh, you need an answer. I think my current song that is resonating for me is a cover. So it's the cover is done by a band called A Perfect Circle, and the song Imagine. And just the way that cover is done, there's a bit of a gloomy tone, but there's also, in terms of the language, like some hopefulness, some sort of sense of coming together, that I just think is really beautiful. When it comes to movement oriented things, I tend to be give me a dance mix 94 kind of mix, and it will be loud and it will be obnoxious and it will drive my partner out to do yard work and things. But yeah, otherwise I'm kind of in a bit of like a 90s dance music and also like a mid 90s kind of punk rock vibe right now.
Oh, nice. I'm always a fan of the 90s. And you mentioned the song Imagine. Ben Platt has a new song out called Imagine. I think it's an original song though. But when I looked it up, there were a ton of songs, Imagine, Imagine, Imagine. So I want to go back and find the one that you had mentioned, because I'm
Yeah, so
always looking for some good music.
if you want something that's a little more kind of like somehow weirdly gloomy and hopeful,
Yeah.
that cover that makes my brain happy with the context that we're in right now.
I will definitely give it a listen. And we like variety of music. So I may not be using that for a, cardio dance workout, but maybe for the stretch, maybe for a nice inspirational-ish ending to class. So this year we've had a lot of opportunities. We talked about pausing during COVID to have more time to ourselves, to not be overcommitted. So at the same time, I think a lot of people binge a show or a movie or maybe a podcast. Some people are avid readers or listeners. So is there anything that you found binge worthy over the past year or so?
Yeah, at our house, we very much have we have shows we watch together and our own shows. So at one point, about halfway through, my partner made the comment, he's like, I just need us to watch something where things turn out happy. I hear you. I feel that. So we have been on kind of like Netflix binges of largely comedy shows that we have already seen before. So we've done Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Parks and Rec, Life in Pieces is what we're finishing up right now. And where it's sort of like, yeah, these are familiar. We know these characters, we know these story arcs. And there was actually some interesting research that came out not too long ago that said like, generally people who are really anxious will tend to watch the same thing on repeat because it's not challenging, right? Our brain gets some comfort in, I know how this goes. And if we think of why when we're stressed, tired, exhausted, we go to that like formula like rom-com and that kind of thing, it's not challenging for our brain. So our couple shows have been all that kind of stuff. And then I have been rewatching Shrill, Insecure, Drag Race, and Housewives shows.
That's so interesting what you said about the familiarity of the shows, that you already know the ending, that it's not challenging. I find myself, especially after a stressful day or a week, that I tend to, rather than find something new to watch, I will go back to, even if it's not a comedy. I don't know if this might be something in our area that the go-to, it's always on television, is SVU episodes, which is not comforting. That is not a comforting show. But because we already have seen all the episodes, we just watch that.
Well, because Olivia's going to come in and like solve the case or like shake things up. And that's a part of it is when we look at, especially from an anxiety treatment model, a term that we'll sometimes use is like intolerance of uncertainty. And we all have different kind of bars or levels of comfort with uncertainty and spontaneity. But what we know of people generally is when we kind of ratchet up stress or make people stressed, fatigued, we all go to this place of, but I need to know. I want things that are more yes or no, black or white, dichotomous, right? We don't want to be challenged. And so when we say, okay, you're stressed, you're tired, something's important to you, like, hey, say our health and well-being and maybe people's businesses go right now, oftentimes we're not going like, yeah, and challenge my brain. It's at the part of my like pack up routine at the end of the day is like, it's the same playlist on repeat, like 4 days a week. My brain likes it.
Wow. Even at the end, these are usually light questions. I feel like I got so much insight from that last question about why I watch reruns of stuff that I've seen over and over again. So thank you so much for spending your time with me today. And again, listeners, I will go ahead and put all of Dr. Meghan Gallagher's contact information so you can connect and follow. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
And that was my interview with Dr. Meghan Gallagher. It was such a great conversation, and I encourage you to follow her on social media. Check out the show notes to connect with her. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate our show, review it wherever you listen to your podcast. Check out the resources on our website, and we're always looking for guests and your comments and questions on our website. You can use the Leave a Voicemail tab, and you can also apply to be a guest on our show or send someone that you know, because we're always looking to amplify voices that would like to destroy diet culture. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll have a new episode for you next week.